I have been searching.
Welcome to Following the Fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wilderness. Just like Israel followed the pillar of fire and smoke, we want to take a new look at our beliefs and just follow him.
And like Israel, we get it wrong a lot, we get lost a lot, but we're doing our best to go where God leads us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Don't you know it's all I have? But even on my heart.
All right, welcome to Following the Fire. Today we have a special guest. We have Steve Martin on. Not that Steve Martin, not this Steve Martin, but another Steve Martin. Never thought. I got this weird message a while back on Facebook. This from a guy named Stephen D. Martin, which is exactly my name. And I thought it was a spam. Somebody faking my account. But it's not. So welcome, Steve. Glad to have you on here.
Yeah, it was a strange and funny kind of story on my end too. I was we apparently are on part of the same Facebook group, and I saw that somebody had posted, somebody named Steve Martin had posted, and I hey, you're just kind of glancing through things, and I saw my name, and I saw the post. I was like, I don't remember posting that. And then I tracked it all down. Oh, wait, there's another guy. Oh, and he does podcasts, and he's talking about faith, and oh my gosh. So you're my new best friend, as I like to tell people.
Yeah, it blew my mind because, like I said, not only is it Stephen D. Martin, but spelled with a V like mine, and you're a pastor,
yep.
And you're passionate about social justice, and it's like they just kept connecting the dots. So we figured we had to have you on our podcast. So
but you're the lucky one because your middle name is Dean, and mine is Dwayne. And we both have reasons why we couldn't just shift towards our middle name, right? Yours was because it would just set you up with the same problem. Mine is because I absolutely hate my middle name. So there you go. Here we are. So we're happy to have you on the podcast. And so what we wanted to do is we like to have folks on once in a while to kind of talk about their faith stories a bit, and kind of where they started, where they are now, and how they got there. Yeah.
So take it away, and we'll ask questions along the way.
Well, I'm an old guy, so I have a lot of stories to tell, and as a pastor, I know how to talk about my faith story. And what I think always happens is we kind of generate this narrative about the way things work, and when we're asked, we just kind of go right into it, and don't really think about it too much. We just recite it the way we've always done so, and I could do that now. But I'm going to try to be a little bit more real. Not that my narrative is not real. It's just I want to try to make it a little bit more fresh than just kind of reciting the same old talking points. But I think one of the things I'm really interested in with what you guys are doing and what a lot of people are doing right now is we're just asking some real serious questions. Yeah. We grew up with one type of faith, and we found that it didn't fit, and it's scary. It's really, really scary to move out into the wilderness, and I love that metaphor that you guys have used. And it's scary, and it's dangerous, and it's treacherous, and all of that kind of stuff. I grew up in East Tennessee it's a small town. It's a medium-sized town for Tennessee, right outside of Knoxville. And it's a town where our main industry is manufacturing really, really powerful nuclear weapons.
Really?
Yeah, right. So, but it was a fascinating place to grow up because it was full of scientists and full of physicists and really, really smart people. There was, I think, a time when I was a kid where it was known as the city where there were more PhDs per capita than anywhere else in the country. I think that shifted over to Cary, North Carolina, at some point. But still, it was a really great place to grow up because it had all the kind of the bucolic vibe of a rural Tennessee town, but we also had a community symphony orchestra. We also had a community ballet. We also had a couple of community art centers. And there was always this very rich kind of life, but the way you can't, even with that, you can't take Tennessee out of the picture. Mm-hmm. And you can't take the Bible Belt out of the picture. And so when I I was raised a United Methodist. I was one of those kids that was dragged kicking and screaming to church, every couple of weeks when my mom had the strength to deal with me. And then in sixth grade, I was confirmed. I really enjoyed my confirmation class and really experienced a lot. And then, this is where the kind of the faith story talking points really come out, is that when I was a junior in high school, I was getting in a lot of trouble. And I was hanging out with the wrong crowd. And one day I saw, I was reading the newspaper. I always like to read the police report. And I read about something that I had done the Friday night before. And, petty crime, little vandalism with a BB gun, but it absolutely sent me through the floor. And really? I went about saying, well, okay, I don't think I'm on the best path here. And it was right at that time when my youth director kind of appeared in my life, and I complete change. And I'm one of those United Methodists who can really talk about a born again experience. Really becoming powerfully converted in the fall of my senior year of high school, and receiving a call to ministry right after that. Real life changing stuff. When I got into college, I was trying to figure it all out. And the people that I found in my life that could talk about faith and really, were spiritual people were mostly Southern Baptists. And so I really, really incorporated kind of a Southern Baptist / Pentecostal point of view into my life, which then I went to seminary, and man, it all just got shredded in seminary. So, you think seminary is supposed to be the place where you kind of get built up. But for me, it was a taking apart. It was a tearing down, and it took me 7 years of being in churches and being a pastor in churches before I really started putting that back together. It's really it's hard to describe why that is the approach of a lot of seminaries. I don't think it's intentional to nobody's trying to tear you down, but there is a deconstruction that has to happen for you to come through with a faith that is really yours and not just the voice of the preacher that you grew up hearing echoing in the back of your head. And I really appreciate that, but that was hard work. That was really difficult to do.
Would you say that's pretty common amongst folks that go through seminary?
It just depends on the seminary, I think. Okay. There are a lot of schools which will I just call them preacher college, and they'll reinforce the denominational line of what you are supposed to talk about as a pastor in a certain denomination. And then there are others that really see their role as giving you a classical education in which they're not really trying to produce any kind of outcome or, political or spiritual or theological outcome, but just to give you all the pieces of it and to challenge you on the things you bring into that experience. So if you're liberal, they'll challenge your liberal stuff. If you're conservative, they'll challenge your conservative stuff. But it's all about kind of taking apart so that you have and giving you the tools you need to build it back up and to find it again. It just took me a really long time. But again, I look back on, I've got a lot of things in my life that I would love to, I always play that game of, gosh, if I only had done this, if I only knew then what I know now, I could do that with this, but in all of those instances, I am so freaking happy that I went through the things that I went through, because I really like where I am now. And I think that, and I think, self-deception's always a problem, but I really do think that I'm walking with Christ more closely today than I ever have been, and more attuned to God's call in my life. And if it took all that stuff years ago, so be it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I see it.
So I'm a little bit curious, what for you in seminary was the thing that needed to be torn down, or that you were brought in with just as part of your experience that got challenged or kind of exposed in seminary?
I think the big thing was just having easy answers and just trying to, and just, again, seeing my role as a faith person, a faith leader, as being somebody who just isn't the Bible answer man. And I think that was taken down. But I think more than that, there was a friend of mine that was really key in my development, and that's a bit of a tortured story as well. But he was a kind of a New York Times reading liberal Christian guy that really rubbed me the wrong way, but we were good friends. Right? We disagreed on just about everything, but countless times we'd go fishing or we'd go out to lunch, or whatever. We'd get locked in these big conversations and these big debates about things. And I would basically say, I'd say something based upon my understandings to that point. And he'd always come back and say, but Steve, what did Jesus say about that? And that was the kicker, right? Because there was all this, convoluted theology that was always kind of surrounding me and coming out of me. But, he just constantly challenged me. What about Jesus? What did he say about that? And for me, that was my first love. When I became a Christian, my youth director told me, read the Bible, but don't start at Genesis and read forward. You'll get bored when you have to run into all the genealogies. Start at the Gospels and deal with the genealogies are short there. So start with the Gospels. And I just remember one night just being so absolutely lit up after I read the Sermon on the Mount. And I couldn't get those things out of my head. I went out for a walk and just, it was so revolutionary. And I heard things, I heard expressions in the Sermon on the Mount, like turn the other cheek, that I'd heard before, but I didn't know where they came from. And it exploded in my mind and my heart with this alternative view of the way things are, a better view, God's point of view. And when he touched upon that, that's when I had to go really in deep, along with the other voices I was hearing in seminary. And I had to really question, okay, are you doing what you set out to do and what you were called to do? AKA, are you following Jesus or are you not? And that was really the piece that has stuck with me all the way through. And there's other iterations of how I've had to deal with that. I had to deal with that when I left the pastorate, when I left the parish ministry side of my work, because I think as long as I was a pastor in a church, I felt responsible for kind of putting forth the company point of view, to classical theology, substitutionary atonement, all those things, And when I was released from that and was able to pursue the work that I'm doing now, basically, that's when I felt the freedom to again, go back to Jesus, go back to the experience, figure out what is the core of it all. And for me, it's his teachings. It's even distilled down to the thing that I think you have to view all of it through, which is, if Jesus was asked, it would be really cool if Jesus was asked, what's the most important thing you should know? Because it'd be really cool if he had an answer for that. And then it would solve all of our problems, right? If we just knew what the most important thing was. Well, you know what? He did do that. Somebody did ask him that. And they asked him that several times, and he answered it the same way every time. Do you know what he said? I bet you do.
Something, love people and God.
Huh.
Maybe not in that order.
Yeah. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
It's so frustrating that you just said it that way, because I have this desire, this fantasy, like, man, if Jesus could just barge into my house and just tell me what I need to do, or just tell me the answers, or just say like, this is it, or even I know it would be like, these are your blind spots. I'm like, that's what I need. And you're like, yeah, if only he had said that. And if only, I don't know, someone wrote it down. And if only you had a copy of that, right behind you,
And it's funny, with all that kind of obvious stuff that he said right in our face, we still go to church and we don't hear that. Why? We hear all this other stuff, we hear all this other convoluted theology about all kinds of things that Jesus never talked about.
Yeah.
But we ignore the very stuff that he did. And I have a theory that goes all the way back to the beginning, because you're not part of any creedal church, right? Do you say
right.
creeds?
No.
Yeah.
No.
In my denomination, we learn from, at the time we're kids, we learned to say the Apostles' Creed.
Right.
And the Apostles' Creed, is this nice little thing about I believe in this and I believe in that. And it's a statement of faith about what you believe as a Christian. It's cool. The fascinating thing, it took me until maybe 10 years ago that a pastor friend of mine in a sermon pointed out that the Apostles' Creed and I believe the Nicene Creed and all the other historical creeds absolutely skip over the life of Jesus completely. Think about it.
Wow.
Think about it. It says, and I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. What about all that stuff he said? What about all the stuff he taught? What about his parables? What about his miracles? What about all that stuff? It's not there. And so, this kind of post-Roman Christianity that we're all really a part of in one way or another, it is. I'm going to overstate things because that's just kind of what I do. But I would say it's unconcerned with the historical Jesus, with the person Jesus, the things that he taught. And it is only concerned with atonement theories and heaven and hell, I would say, as a way of a society or a social system trying to control our behavior, right? To get us to conform to a certain, because we believe that doing some, certain things is going to send us to hell. We're maybe not going to do those things. But when we invest ourselves in a Jesus who, oh, by the way, was a radical, was a revolutionary in a very different kind of sense than a revolutionary is usually thought of, but still a revolutionary, someone who is very, very strongly and powerfully anti-empire, anti-Rome, and cast a completely different vision than all of the kingdoms of the earth cast. It's kind of not surprising when you think about all that Rome might not have wanted to tell that story really loudly and broadly as it put Christianity into its system and so on. So enough of my yakking. These are the things that I'm, as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about.
That's fascinating. I like the Nicene Creed. It's novel for me, right? And it's very much though something that I had already struggled with, which is I already know that I'm supposed to believe the correct things.
Yeah.
But there's, it's pretty light on the application. There's not very much like, so now here's what we are. Here's what the church is. Here's what our role is or what our actions are.
Because the nation state is really threatened by a group of people that if we were told, here's how you were to act according to these things, the nation state would really be kind of challenged by that, I think.
Yeah, we early on in the early episodes of our podcast, Nathan and I talked about our desire to know God and have a relationship versus know about God. And it's kind of along those lines, because I never really thought about how much of those creeds and the things, the way things are set up in churches in general, there's so much emphasis on the knowledge, and especially in the West, knowledge and believing the right things here and there. And it's like assumed that if you know all the stuff, you'll apply it the right way, but it's clearly not that way.
Well, yeah, and I remember going to a church in my community, taking our kids, leading a confirmation class, and taking them to another church who was describing their confirmation process. And again, if you're not part of a church that does this, confirmation is kind of that bar mitzvah experience in the Christian faith. It's a point at which, in some traditions we kind of acknowledge that, okay, it's time for me to take on the yoke of faith myself, rather than what my parents are kind of choosing for me. And we went to the church, this other church, and he was describing how, this is where our Christian education program is. It's like this is how we clean out the offering plates. And this is what you do when you change the paraments, the cloths on the altar. And this is what you do when you bring the light forward in the worship service to light the candles. And I'm like,
right.
That's Christian education? That's teaching people how to be part of a club where you have a secret handshake. That's not teaching people about how to challenge the evil powers of the world, right?
Yeah. Like growing up, before I left the church I was at, I was in charge of adult education. And that was the term we used, adult education and children's education. And there's a United Church of Christ that we've been visiting a little bit recently, and they don't have adult and children education. They have spiritual formation. I thought, I like that term.
Sure.
It's a great term. Like, let's help you form spiritually and do something with it instead of just knowing stuff.
But I think one of the biggest changes to me is the phase, I think, where I had to start really learning that in order to walk with Jesus, I needed to start putting my money where my mouth was. And it wasn't about believing the right things. It wasn't about being able to say the right things. It was, and it wasn't about really just being kind of a nice person. It was about speaking up and being, putting my body in the way. I know that's kind of a buzzword in liberal circles these days, but if you think about it, when Jesus says, there's no greater love than to lay one's life down for their friends, that's what we're talking about, and that's not just something we do in the military. That's when we see that people are being oppressed, or we see that people are being wronged, having to put yourself kind of in that situation and put yourself in a position where you are in the middle of that. That's where kind of the next iteration started to happen for me. And that's really the hard part, because I'm not a particularly courageous guy. And I don't have these feelings wash over me of, oh, cool, you're going to be okay. You're going to be just fine. You're at peace with this terrible situation. I have been scared to death trying to be a Christian presence in a situation where real evil was being perpetuated. And that's hard for me, but that's really where I think that's where I'm called to go in these years of my life.
So, and it sounds like you're talking about protest or even the race. Is that what you're referring to?
I was, I guess is maybe a good time to talk about Charlottesville.
I was about to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a day that it was in, again, if you don't know, the National Council of Churches is one of the old agencies probably about 100 years old, really got going in the 50s and 60s and was a really kind of a powerful force in American culture when, all the mainline churches were really big and everybody was going to church on Sunday morning. Not as powerful and not as effective anymore, for sure. But when I was working there, we were getting calls from pastors in Charlottesville saying, "Hey, so there's been some stuff going down here over the last few weeks. It hadn't made the news, but it's getting worse. There's right-wing groups that are trying to protest the fact that the city council said take these Confederate statues down, etc." And things are really getting bad, and they're getting bad. Things are happening right in front of our churches, where
Wow.
on Sunday morning, and we need to do something. And then I had two guys come in, and they the way they describe it is they bum rushed me in my office. I didn't feel like I was being bum rushed at all. It was a nice, polite visit that I was kind of expecting that day. But they came in and they told me, they said, we really need backup on this. We need a national call to go out for clergy to come and show up at this thing that's going to happen on August 12th of 2017. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm the communications guy. I'll put the word out. I'll put it in our newsletter. I'll do some social media posts and everything. And then it occurred to me that one of my gifts and secret powers that I have is I'm a photographer, and I'm a kind of a decent photographer, and I'm very passionate about visual storytelling. And I said, hey guys, I can come and I can take pictures. And they're like, oh cool, we got to have that money shot, got to have that that great shot that tells a story. And then I was like, oh crap, what did I just do? What did I just do? And then they it keeps going from there. It's like I go back to the staff and say, well, we really need to. I think this is an important thing that some of us need to show up for. And other people on the staff are like, well, I'm supposed to be on vacation that weekend, and I'm going to be in Mexico, and I'm going to be in Cuba, and I'm going to be, and everybody was going to be gone. And I was like, oh man, this is down to me, and I don't want to go, but I told them I would, and there's nobody else going to go, so I have to cover this for the staff. And I went, and it was absolutely terrifying. We were told ahead of time that the organizers of this clergy counter protest that formed, we were told that it was quite likely that there would be, first of all, there was the fear of the police was the organizers felt like the police were going to be the bigger problem than the protesters. And that was because of their experience in Ferguson, Missouri. And that turned out to not be the issue at all. But what they were also saying is that they had seen on websites that the Klan was planning to have snipers on rooftops.
Seriously?
And that the neo-Nazis were going to no, it was the Klan was going to open carry, but the neo-Nazis were going to concealed carry.
Oh.
And that was much more dangerous, I thought, to have people concealed carrying than to have people open carrying. And that it was going to be this hotbed environment where somebody was going to get killed. The morning of the protest, we gathered in a church for a beautiful, beautiful worship service to get ready. It's like really like 7 o'clock in the morning or something. It was really early. And when it was over, the organizer kicked everybody out that wasn't going to be actually on the ground, in the protest. There were some city council members or some reporters, and kicked them all out, closed the doors, very dramatically said, all right, you guys need to understand that if you go out on the streets this morning, you will be arrested.
Whoa.
Some of you will be seriously injured, and some of you might be killed.
Whew.
And
Well, you're like, I'm just here to take pictures.
There's no sugarcoating that. There's no, and I didn't want to be there, but I knew I was supposed to be there. I knew that everything around me had kind of conspired to put me in that place, and that I had a unique task and a unique job to do, and I did it, and it was terrifying. It was lots of stories to tell from the event, but again, my pictures got published around the world, and I'm very proud to have been there as a visual storyteller, telling the story of, that I don't think the news media picked up on a lot. And the story was, for me, was that there were committed Christians, there were clergy who were willing to make a statement by putting themselves in grave danger, and to do nothing but sing and stand when they were being, shouted at, spat at, insulted, all that stuff. They never, ever responded with harsh words or anger or anything. And fortunately, our group, emerged from the whole thing without being injured or killed or anything. We know that's not true for everybody in the that was part of that day, but it was a very. I'm really proud that I was there. It was a really formative experience in my faith life, but it's one that I ask God repeatedly, please don't send me there again. Please don't send me there again. Please don't send me there again.
Yeah, the narrative that that I remember hearing from that was, there's like the neo-Nazi groups and things like that. And then the poor young lady who was killed by the guy who drove through the crowd.
Heather Heyer, yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have Trump later talking about the find people on both sides thing. But yeah, I didn't realize there was this counter protest there from clergy. That's great.
I mean, that's why I went, and I one of my questions ever since seminary is, okay, there's social action, there's social justice, there's all that, but what does it mean to have social action in the name of Christ?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt like that should have a different character than any other, because we adhere to a story, we adhere to the story of people, of saints, of the Son of God, and we have those stories to inform our lives, and they paint a picture of doing things differently.
Yeah.
And so, it was always a struggle to me. Okay, social justice, yes, social, I get it. There's, standing on the side of the oppressed, yes, I get it. But I don't understand what makes a pastor doing those things Christian in and of itself. You know what I'm saying? So, So I've always struggled with, what does Christian social action look like? What does it look like for a social justice movement in the name of Jesus? What does that look like? And I think in Charlottesville, it was people wearing clergy garb, wearing stoles, wearing collars, wearing albs, robes, things like that, outward signs of their faith, and being there and singing "This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to let it shine." While they were, we were standing, there was a row of guys right in front of us that were dressed in military fatigues and had AR-15s.
Ugh.
And right in front of us, and turned out to be nice guys. Again, I can say, but in all the chaos and craziness of that day, I felt like that was a very, very important, and very authentic, sign of Christian social witness. It was just people, not bearing arms, not being violent, not being hateful, not responding with hate to hate, and just being there and singing and loving. And that really, I think, was the beautiful thing that happened that day.
Yeah, you mentioned that it was a very important moment for you in your spiritual formation or journey. What would you say? What changed for you, or what came more obvious, or how did that alter your faith journey?
Well, like I said, it kind of made me pray every day, dear Lord, please don't send me into something like that again.
Yeah.
It's hard to quantify, really. I think about friends that were there that I didn't know were going to be there, and they just showed up, which was freaky. And the bond that created between us.
Yeah.
And we reflect on, we get together every once in a while, or we talk on the phone and we go, oh yeah, that day. And that makes an indelible bond between all of us that were there, that day.
Yeah.
But I also, I have been very much aware of, since, the mid 2000s, I've been very, very aware of, a rising in kind of fascist sympathy in the United States, and very fearful about that. But when I was faced with it right in front of me, then it didn't. I don't know that it changed me as much as it was kind of, this is what you've been prepared for the last 15 years. This is what this is the path you've been walking. And I remember there was an exercise that was when we came off the street and we were chilling at this restaurant that was kind of a safe haven. Lisa Sharon Harper, who's just a beautiful, beautiful soul, was leading us through a meditation exercise. And she said, okay, after the meditation exercise, turn to the person next to you and tell them what you heard. If you heard God speak, or you heard something, or there was some feeling that came forward, if you turn to the person next to you and share that, if you will. And I turned to the person next to me and I said, and I did, I heard it. I heard this like 3 or 4 times in my life where I've heard an audible voice from God. And what I heard there during that exercise was, well done, good and faithful servant. And I said that to the person next to me, and she gasped and she said, that's exactly what I heard.
Whoa.
And therefore I think, it wasn't something that really propelled me in a new direction, but it definitely, I think through that prayer, that word, that was affirmation that I have been doing what I needed to be doing for the last, 15 years of walking in the wilderness. And we could talk a lot about that. But my journey has been an unsafe one. It has been it's not really institutionally acceptable. I don't draw a salary as a pastor, and I don't have a pension contribution, and I don't have all those things that we often rely upon in our churches as clergy. And life's had its ups and downs, but when I heard that, and that was affirmed by the person next to me, it kind of made it all worthwhile, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
It sounds like, to oversimplify your story, that you had met a theoretical Jesus and you went to seminary and you knew what the right things were to believe, and you met someone who believed the same things about the same person but saw the world differently. But then you spend 7 years kind of working with that, and then it sounds like probably several more working to a place where now you're very much meeting the practical Jesus in real life situations. And something I wonder, because I've spent so much of my time in the theoretical part of it, and I just get to where I think I believe the right thing and I rest, because I think I've done the thing. And I think about if I went to a protest. You talked about how how what Jesus teaches is threatening to nation states. It's an upside down kingdom, but I just bring my kingdom that I grew up in to that kind of place, and I think about enemies and winning and losing and defeat. And so when you got to that place in that kind of apex moment, were you ready for it? And if you were, what got you to that point where you really were ready to be Jesus and not just, I guess, what a secular counter protest would be, right? There's a difference.
First of all, you're spot on with my evolution, and I think that's really I think you summed that up very well. What I don't want to paint any rosy portrait of it and say that, oh, the heavens opened and you know it was this feeling of bliss and I knew I was in the right, and you know, no, it was the opposite. It was this awful, just awful feeling of what I had been through. I texted my kids after it was over. I'd let my ex-wife know that I was going to be there, and I said, "Don't tell the kids. I don't want them to worry about me." And then I got through, and I texted the group, the family chat, and I said, "I'm back from Charlottesville, and I'm fine. I didn't get hurt." And one of my kids wrote, "Wait, what?"
Right.
And I didn't, and I had to. It took me a couple of weeks just to get over the kind of the trauma of the experience where I could really talk about it. I had to do a lot of writing and stuff and reflecting for my job immediately after, and I think it's just awful stuff. It's not. It was too much for me. But yeah, I would just say that it was not something where I just felt like, oh, I got it, it's all good. It just is another stop on a journey. And the cool thing, I guess, really that comes out of it is I picked up some real cool friends along the way while I was there, built some real, bonds, like I said. And I think sometimes that's all you get. And I think that's good enough.
And you had mentioned early on your friend asking the question, what would Jesus say about that?
Yeah.
And I wonder if, I don't know how many times I've had in my life where I could maybe say, I just did a thing Jesus would have done. When you think back to that moment, is that kind of a moment in your life where you're like, I think I was doing it. I think Jesus would have been standing there next to me.
No, I didn't. And I knew Jesus was calling me to that, but I didn't feel like this was something he would have done. But I did say this is my Jonah moment. I did say, to myself, WWJD, what would Jonah do? Because Jonah is, he's my mascot, my patron prophet. He's, it's like God says, go to Nineveh. He's like, oh, cool. I'm going to get on this boat and go the other way. I'll see you later. And then God brings him back and spits him out on the shore. And he's like, all right, I'll go tell him. And I can just picture Jonah walking up into Nineveh and saying, okay, I'm going to do what I have to do. 40 days in the city will be overturned. Bye. I did it, God. Fine. I'm out of here. And then, they did repent. and then Jonah's pouting about it, Yeah. I mean, that's me. That's the extent of my prophetic experience. It's what would Jonah do for me? And that's what I felt like. Yes.
Who's Nineveh and where's Tarshish?
Who's Nineveh?
Yeah, who was
Nineveh's just all the places I don't want to go. Right? I mean, it's 100 places, and I could name them off. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go be a pastor. I didn't want to go to a church. I didn't want to go my first appointment as a pastor was in a little area called Piney Flats, Tennessee. Just picture that any way you want. You'll probably be right. And I didn't want to go, and I went, and there's just 100 places. I would even say in my personal life, my divorce, seeing my family fall apart, things like that, places I didn't want to go, but I went, and I found Jesus there. in all of those places. And so Tarshish is it's where, it's where I'm comfortable. It's where, it's hanging out with the people that are like me. It's the fantasy life that I think I would love. That there's all of us. It's said in the United Methodist Church that every good pastor has a drawer full of job applications in their desk, because it's just we're just always trying to find a way out. And I've done my share of that. I've done my share of trying to get out and be out of it. But I keep coming back. I keep being drawn back. And I had a perfectly good opportunity to leave it all behind when I left the National Council of Churches. But you know what? I came back and I found a way to be in ministry to ministers and to be an assistant to clergy, and to try to use all this stuff that I've been through as a way of helping churches be more authentic and more faithful and more effective. So
why don't you tell us about that a little bit? What you're doing now?
It's a project with the audacious title of an institute, and I call it the Lakelands Institute. And what it started as a pandemic project to try to build up some online resources for clergy to help them get through the age of online worship. And it grew from there because it turns out there are a whole bunch of high-level church executives that were let go about the same time I was, and they were all looking for a way to get back in. And so guess what? We banded together and have been working to deal with some, I would call them the real pressing issues of the church these days. And it's the racism question. It's the online ministry question. It's about how, the church is no longer bound by time and space. We don't have to do it at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning anymore in a specific building. We can be anywhere and everywhere at any time. And how are we going to connect with people when we have that ability? It's about real estate, because one of the guys I work with says that he's made a projection that 30% of all the churches in the United States are going to close in the next 5 years.
Really?
And what is that going to do to denominations and structures for the institutional church when they don't currently have a plan for what to do with empty buildings? New Jersey is sitting, the United Methodist Church in New Jersey is sitting on $1.5 billion worth of property. 30% of those churches are going to close in 5 years. That means $500 million worth of real estate is going to need to be dealt with. Well, guess what? Some of those places are in very, very hot real estate markets. So there's stuff you could do that would benefit the church rather than just letting them kind of fall apart. So it's things like that we're trying to work on. Work with church agencies, work with even individual churches. I've got a great contract right now where I'm just flat out doing communications for a church that I love, and I'm just eating it up. It's all stuff like that. And I just think I think the church is in the middle of an incredible reformation right now. I think, Phyllis Tickle said that every 500 years the church goes through some radical reshaping and reformation, and we're overdue. And I think we're in the middle of one. I think so too. I am so excited to be in the middle of that conversation. It's so cool. But it's scary too, because I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make a living doing that. So far, so good, though,
I've been hearing about healthcare workers who are getting burnt out and leaving their jobs at a time when we need them the most. And, personally and anecdotally, I see the same thing happening in churches.
Yep.
And you're someone who had that opportunity, and probably even caused to kind of maybe be pushed away or have a chip on your shoulder or whatever. So as how has that prepared you for this moment, having conversations with clergy and churches?
Well, that's the cool thing. When I left parish ministry, it was because I really felt called to do something different, and I couldn't keep doing the same thing over again. So I had to launch out and find my way, and now, you know, it's an amazing thing, because now I've got credibility, and people know that I've pastored churches. People know that I spent 19 years in the pulpit. People know that I care deeply about the experience of being a pastor, and I know how hard it is. And I think that has prepared me to be a voice of, but what if we did this? What if we tried what if we thought about it in this different way? For example, this church that I'm working with, that I described, I pitched the idea of doing a course for the church on the spirituality of photography. We already talked about some of that. Okay, so I do a four evening Zoom based course on the spirituality of photography, and the pastor says, "Oh, that's great. Let's do it. But let's open it up to the whole town. Let's open it up to the whole town, so anybody in the city can be part of it." I'm like, dude, I'm going to open it up to the whole world. I'm going to, you know, it's why think about things geographically anymore? So it's not a matter of capacity. It's just a matter of imagination. It's what we see ourselves as being able to do. You know, I'm talking to you guys. You're in what, Colorado? You're both in Colorado. I'm in Washington, D.C. area. Few time zones between us, but hey, we're building a relationship here. And that's the possibility that exists today that didn't exist before. And I feel as though I've got a lot of experience in both of those worlds. I've got experience in the pulpit in a tiny little church with, you know, just a few people there, and all the way up to working for a national organization and having a gigantic mailing list and all this kind of stuff. So it just, again, I don't know if I'll be able to make a living doing it particularly. I'm definitely not going to get rich doing it, but it sure does feel like it's where I need to be right now.
Yeah, I think it's great that you're doing that. I haven't come across, I'm sure there are other groups doing something similar, but I haven't come across anything before. Because they're, especially like you said, pandemics kind of kicked off a whole new, like, hurry up and figure this out. And I like that you are going beyond that. Like, I see you have a course on anti-racism and Zoom's online presence for engagement. You know, it's a lot of great broad spectrum of stuff.
Yeah, and they're all things that are connected, because we are in the middle of this racial reckoning right now. And churches need to be ready to face it. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. said, you know, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most divided hour in American life. It hasn't changed since he died. And that needs to be part of what we do. And it's not just, you know, we're going to put a Black Lives Matter sign out in front of the church. That doesn't, I guess that has its place in some communities, but it's really about learning how we can love our neighbors, how we can love our neighbors as ourselves, because we're living in a world that's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Our neighbors are closer and closer and closer.
As the world's been changing, and how we were consuming media was changing, how we were even, excuse the French, but how we were consuming church or consuming religion was changing. And then things got turned up quite a bit, sped up. It seems like we've made a decade worth of movement in just a year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of downsides to that. What is your imagination, your vision for what the opportunities can be? What can the church be next year and in the next 10 years?
Well, first we when we got pushed online by the pandemic, the maybe not the technology that we're using today, it wasn't, maybe not as mature 10 years ago, but definitely we had some capacity for this. And what I'd like to say is that the pandemic just kind of took a lot of trends that were already in place in church life and just, you know, put them on hyperdrive. and so we emerged from the pandemic. We came back to our in-person worship services, and our churches were mostly in decline already, and now they're really in decline. Oddly, though, a lot of churches are experiencing better financial situation than they've had. But I do struggle with this. I think a Christian must always have a theology of place. I think places do matter. I think Jerusalem as a holy city is a real thing. It's not just a concept. There's really something holy about Jerusalem if you go there. And likewise, my church that I grew up in, is a sacred place for me. My mother's buried there. I was ordained there. It will always hold this sacred place in my life. And if we don't have that, we're missing something. So I don't see the church evolving past buildings and structures. But I do know that in the last 100 years or 120 years, churches have been located in different places based upon transportation modes. In the 1900s, the churches were in the middle of every town where you could walk or you could ride your horse. Then it got in the 50s, they were being built out in the suburbs because you could drive out there, and people were living in the suburbs, and the church kind of parish model adjusted to, the distance people could drive to get to church. Now, if we don't have a robust online presence, then every other institution that does is going to surpass us. Yeah. And the imagination of our kids is going to go there instead of to the church. And so I think it behooves us to really explore this space. And I think there are just amazing possibilities that are part of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I know that there was a pandemic about 100 years ago.
Yep.
But if I have to be living through a pandemic in my lifetime, I'm glad that I'm living through a pandemic in a time when we can have conversations like this, like seeing you in DC. And like when we were starting to look around for churches in town, we were able to visit sort of tons of churches without getting outside at all.
Without doing that scary, scary thing of walking through the doors and hoping you're not recognized as a visitor.
Yeah.
I had been visiting a place that was pretty, most people were online. And last Sunday I drove up and there were maybe five times the amount of cars in the parking lot. And I just drove past the church and went to a restaurant because I was like that same feeling of, dread and fear of people.
Yeah.
That it's actually important that I get over that to get to the people. So it's almost like the online presence is both something that can bring people in and coax people in, but also for me, I think I've got to avoid the crutch or the easier path.
I did have a fascinating conversation with a guy who's a pastor of a church in Melbourne, Australia, that they elected. It's a very liturgical church. It's one where they've structured the service to be very much involved, involving everybody in the service. And they actually elected as a church that even when they could come back together, they were going to not do that because they found that their worship service worked better on Zoom than it did in person.
Huh.
And I that has just blown my mind.
Really?
And that's something I think we have the freedom now to explore. And it doesn't all have to be worship. There's a lot of things churches can do on during days of the week that are not, they're not the kind of,
Yeah.
The whole thing of worship itself, but there's just a lot of ways we can engage people in Christian education, Christian conversations, etc. That we have the opportunity to do now, and we're freed from the real estate, and we're freed from the scary experience of walking in the building. We can join in on a Zoom call and keep our camera turned off until we're ready to turn it on. It's really, and this is just the way things are working in the rest of the world. So I think it's an opportunity for us.
Yeah, and bringing it back to what you were talking about earlier, I think it's an opportunity to start focusing on, instead of just showing up at a place on a Sunday or learning stuff about God, to start working on getting people out of their houses and doing things for other people and doing things like Christ would do them.
Yep.
I think that's a great opportunity.
And it's really cool to work with smart people and to talk to smart people all over the world all the time who are figuring this stuff out. I don't know the first thing about what to do. I don't have a prescription for it, but man, it's fun to be in the middle of that conversation, to hear what people are doing, what they're trying, what they're experimenting with, and what they're finding works and what doesn't. It's just such a cool place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us how to get in touch with you or how to find your stuff.
Yeah, it's easy. It's lakelandsinstitute.com. And
Okay.
and I try to make everything there as easily accessible as possible. So sign up for the newsletters, the emails, and don't send them out too often. So don't worry, I'm not going to fill up your email box. I do a podcast, and I've got a guy named Steve Martin that was a guest recently, and I still got to put that together and edit that thing and get it out there. But I've taken a little time off from the podcast lately, but that's got to fire up again soon. And
what's the name of your podcast?
It's called Mainline.
Okay.
So, again, my heart has always been with the Mainline Church, for better, for worse. It's where it is. And so we're there to talk about all things, dealing that the Mainline churches are dealing with right now. So that's there. And but definitely just my website, lakelandsinstitute.com, is a great place to connect.
You have any good stories about being confused with the comedian and banjo player, Steve Martin?
I don't know, Steve. What do you think? Have you do we want to go down this road?
Well, I've got a lot of stories. I don't know how many good stories I have.
My favorite one was when I was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York one day, and I was sitting down in the cafeteria or the little dining area, and people at the next table were saying, "Hey, we heard Steve Martin's in the building." And I thought, I'm a bit of a selfie collector. And I thought, oh my gosh, how great would it be if I could get a selfie with Steve Martin, and that would be like the most epic. And then we have to have the conversation about who's the real Steve Martin. Do you ever get that? Are you the real Steve Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the real Steve Martin. Yeah, I'm the real Steve Martin. You're the real Steve Martin.
For one of our anniversaries, Christy and I went down to Denver and reserved a really nice restaurant. Spotted a really nice restaurant, and we got there and we're like, reservation for Steve Martin, and the look on the lady's face, it just fell. She's like, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "Well, happy to see you too." Not the guy we were hoping for. It's like,
yeah, that's a good story. That's a good
It's
one.
really good.
Makes you feel welcome.
But I think the best story that I've had is building a friendship with a guy named Stephen D. Martin, and it's not me. I think that's been a real joy here lately.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the podcast, man, and looking forward to getting to know you better.
May it happen. May it happen. Nate, great to meet you and get a chance to chat.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
See you guys later.
All these messages I thought you wanted to hear, but it only takes a whisper.
Hey, thanks for listening to Following the Fire. If you'd like to see show notes for this episode, which includes links to everything we mentioned as well as all the scriptures, head on over to followingthefire.com and just click on this episode. There's also contact information on the website. Let us know what you think about the show and if you have any suggestions for future topics. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you could. It really helps other folks find the show. And as always, thanks to the fabulous Daniel Wheat for the theme song and the music for the episode. You can find more of his stuff on Apple Music and Spotify. See you later.